The Creative Force of Love, by Jacobo Grinberg. There exist forces in nature that cohere and cause growth and others that repel and disorganize. Our entire existence depends on their subtle balance. Mexican neurophysiologist Jacobo Grinberg asserts that love, the force that unifies and creates, is in retreat. It depends on our inner work that this balance is maintained. Since the origin of the universe, a primordial force has manifested itself, giving direction to evolution. From the first elementary particles, the action of that force has provoked a unification whose beginning was the creation of the first atom, that of hydrogen, product of the dynamic union of a proton and an electron, and its final result, known, the human body, the pinnacle of unification and complexification, as Teilhard de Chardin called the directional process of the tendency of evolutionary energy. At the elementary level, that force is called gravitation or electromagnetic attraction force or weak or strong interaction force. At the level of human experience, that force is called love. But that is not the only force acting in the universe. There exists another, of opposite direction, which instead of uniting, separates. The force of attraction coheres, that of repulsion individualizes. Both, in dynamic equilibrium, keep the cosmos united and simultaneously differentiated. If only one of them existed, the unitive one, everything would collapse into an amorphous unity. If the repulsive one, the universe would disperse after exploding into 1,000 pieces. At the human level, a balance between two forces is also required, that of love and that of individualization. The existence of only one of them would end up making us one with others, in the case of love without individualization, or absolutely selfish in the case of individualization without love. Both allow the richness of variety along with the feeling of union. Their adequate balance is maturity. Their imbalance towards either of the two polarities would be catastrophe. The imbalance. Reality is holographic, and what happens at the planetary level is a reflection and is reflected at the individual level. We live, as a planet, in an imbalance provoked by an excess of the force of separation. This manifests in multiple forms, the most serious being war. We have taken the process of individualization to an absurd extreme, transgressing the limit of its natural function, reaching selfishness without love. We have departed from the directive force of the universe, and the consequences of this imbalance are the death and destruction that are currently ravaging the planet. It is necessary to return to balance and apply a counterweight to this planetary polarization. The observer. The act of observing is one of the most mysterious events. During observation, all observable contents undergo a unification. The limits of observation are unknown since they change through training. Presumably, if this is adequate and profound, these limits undergo an expansion that allows unifying cognitive processes, organic events, emotional processing, sounds and images from the environment, etc. That is to say, when observing, we unify everything observable in the act of witnessing. Since the observable can be expanded, the capacity for unification would seem to have no known limit. For all the above, it is not strange that this operation of awareness results in the experience and state of self-consciousness. Self-consciousness occurs when a unification powerful enough to interconnect the subject of the experience with the unifying force of evolution takes place. In this portentous act of power, the force of love is activated. Meditation. Meditating, when done correctly, fills the one who does it with love precisely for the same reason. When meditating in an adequate way, the unification process is activated, and this setting in motion of this process acts as an attractor of the universal unification force. The connection with this force is experienced as love, but the connection with the unification force is not only produced in one direction. The subject who meditates, and who therefore unifies in observation, functions actively, not only receiving the force of love, but also granting it. They reproduce in their microcosm the same cosmic current of unifying power, and with it, they become a kind of generator of it, feeding the universe with it. Restoring balance. At no time in contemporary history has it been more urgent to restore the lost balance. The force of selfish dispersion is exalted and dominates that of unification. The arms of the balance are in imbalance, and about to come off their axis. It is necessary to feed the cosmos with love, and the technique of unification through meditation is one of the most powerful tools to achieve it. The use of this tool implies the achievement of an equanimous and simultaneous observation of an ever-increasing number of components of the experience, both corporal, tactile sensations, thoughts, emotions, etc., and extracorporeal events and happenings of the environment, from self-consciousness to unity consciousness. When the equanimous and simultaneous observation of a sufficient number of experiences is achieved, self-consciousness is activated, which constitutes a first level of unification. In it, the self is recovered, and it is nuanced with love. A first contact with the universal unifying force takes place here. But if one continues adding contents of observation to the conscious observer, the contact with the unifying force is strengthened, and a moment arrives in which self-consciousness is transformed into unity consciousness. Here, the subject of the experience no longer establishes contact with the force of love, but becomes it entirely. The observer, separate from the observed, disappears to give rise to a union. Love. Our true heritage is love. We are the most finished product of the unification force, and our body is a work of art of balance and organization of billions of elements conjugated into an integrated unity. It would never have been possible to reach organic unity if there had not existed a unification force in the universe, which began to manifest itself since its very creation in the primordial explosion of the Big Bang. Before the creation of the cosmos, everything was perfect unity without differentiations or divisions. The creation of space, time, and matter activated a process of differentiation and distancing of dispersed units. However, something mysterious in space-time decided to return to the origin, but with the gain of self-consciousness and the creation of a universe millionaire in manifestations. The force of love was introduced into the cosmos, and it is what makes us be what we are. The force of love. Nothing is more powerful than it. Everything succumbs to its fascination because it represents what has always existed even before the creation of the universe. The best way to overcome is by loving. Whoever has exercised that right knows what I mean. Fear disappears when it is loved. The same happens with confusion or even with hatred. Everything succumbs to the force of love and is transformed into it. There is nothing more urgent at present than learning to use that force. In fact, the very survival of the planet depends on our capacity to enlarge ourselves in love. The force of balanced attraction. Observing and loving. One can observe without loving, but it is not possible to love without observing. To observe, it is only necessary to remember that it is possible to observe. But for loving, remembering is not enough. It is also necessary to first connect in oneself. To love, one first needs to be in self-consciousness, and for that, as was said before, one needs to meditate, unifying the observed in observation. Remembering that one can observe is remembering that one is always beyond all identity. Let's suppose that I am confused or that I am afraid. If I remember that I can observe my confusion or my fear and I do so, I place myself in self-consciousness, no longer identified with the confusion or the fear, but realizing their existence. The one who realizes, witnesses or observes, is always beyond what is witnessed and closer to themselves. That is, in self-consciousness from which identification with events or emotions no longer exists. From self-consciousness, love arises because it is not possible to love in identification, but from a healthy self. Self-consciousness is not the ego for the simple reason that the ego can be observed from self-consciousness. The ego is identity while the self is love. From the ego one cannot love, only possess. From self-consciousness one cannot possess, only love. The observer cannot observe. The one who affirms the contrary confuses an identity or a content of experience with the observer. Therefore, there do not exist infinite chains of observers, but only one. It is understood here that the tendency to unification possesses direction, and the reason that allows affirming that the observer is the guide of this direction. The reason is simple. The observer is always in the next link, and the next link when conquered becomes a content of observation of the next link. Each step is unified in the next, and the observation, in addition to possessing direction, magnifies the unified totality. In this direction of unification, each step activates another quality of experience, which is unpredictable from the previous link. At a certain moment, a threshold is crossed, and self-consciousness becomes unity consciousness. In unity consciousness, the self loses limits and expands to the degree in which knowledge, the knower and the known become the same. By knowing oneself, the subject knows everything, since everything happens within themselves. There does not exist here the internal separate from the external, nor the observer different from the observed. The experience with respect to the world is that oneself is the world in a strange union in which there is no symbiosis, but also no separation. There it is understood that the image sees itself and simultaneously one exists as an individual. Everything in the experience of union is love, and everything is one.
Remember to like and subscribe, and let the sound of the bell guide you back.